Hi, and welcome to the Change from the Centre podcast. I'm Martin Curtis, as you can clearly see, and this is the second edition of my new podcast. And in this one, I thought I'd move on from the introduction where I talked about why I thought politics was broken and why I thought it was important that there was some focus on how the centre ground can fix the serious issues that our political system faces. Because otherwise we end up driving to the polar extremes of politics, which is where we're headed at the moment. So what I thought I'd talk about today is exactly what One Nationism is, because I talked in the last podcast about my view that I am a One Nationist and my belief that I'm a One Nationist. And just before I do that, I need to repeat the point I made, which is that although that is where I am, there's no politician, I don't believe, that should stick strictly with one ethos. And I do think any politician needs to sit where he is and sometimes reach left and reach right to pull things in and to pull ideas and thinking in. And one of the issues, I believe, as you move towards the political extremes, is that you get buried in political ethos rather than the practicalities of the world we live in. And that is true of socialism, or as you move to the right, of actually libertarianism, which I don't quite understand libertarianism as far as politics is concerned. I think it's to a certain extent very strongly opposite to One Nationism in that I think it's a political Darwinism is the phrase I use. So what is One Nationism? So One Nationism has its origins arguably in Disraeli, who wrote a book called Sybil or the Two Nations in 1845. And it's interesting, Douglas Hurd's book about Disraeli and the publicity he did around it, it mentions the fact that there is no evidence that Disraeli actually used the phrase One Nationism. And he is correct, but he did talk about two nations, and he talked about it quite a lot, especially in this book. And the book is about an individual's growth, basically, a personal growth into an understanding of the world and how the world works in the UK, and about the differentiation there is between rich and poor. And I thought the best way of doing this is to read a quote out to you. So I'm going to just look down a little bit, so apologies for that. But the quote is this: two nations between whom there is no intercourse and no sympathy, who are ignorant of each other's habits, thoughts, and feelings, as if they were dwellers in different zones, or inhabitants of different planets, who are formed by different breeding, are fed by a different food, are ordered by different manners, and are not governed by the same laws. And of course, he is referring to the rich and the poor. And so what Disraeli and the thinking around One Nationism is how you eliminate that gap between rich and poor. And it's not just a gap in wealth, although that is important. It's a gap in thinking sometimes as well. And it's certainly a gap in understanding, in that there is a very strong argument that the rich have no understanding of the lives of the poor and of the poorest in our society. And I think to a certain extent obvious, but the poorest also have no understanding of the rich. And that is to a certain extent important, because one of the ways to create wealth is to basically repeat what other wealthy people have done. Arguably, I wouldn't know. So that's the origins of what Disraeli created and what One Nationism was about, which is about overcoming the gap between the rich and the poor and creating one nation as a result. And Disraeli had a huge impact in terms of One Nationism, and was actually a very popular prime minister. Just to give you some context for that, when Disraeli, an organization called the Primrose League was set up in Disraeli's memory. And the reason for the Primrose League was Disraeli once told Queen Victoria that primroses were his favourite flower. And so she used to send him primroses every year on his birthday. So the Primrose League was set up, and it was set up, I think, in 1883. and part of its aims were to promote conservatism, and obviously within that sort of the one nationism, and so it was universal membership. There were two levels of membership effectively, and those those with the most money used to pay more. But what's more important about the Primrose League was that anybody, whatever sex, man or woman, was able to become an officer effectively, and treasurer, chairman, all those things, and therefore there was equality of opportunity within the league. And there is an argument that giving women the sort of experience they had in running organisations was a significant aid in um, in setting up and driving forward the suffragette movement. So an organisation that's not to be sniffed at. It doesn't exist anymore, and I think to a certain extent it's a shame, because we certainly need an organisation that is pushing the Conservative Party back to the centre ground. Because unless it does, and unless it recognises this very quick, it's going to die. My view is the Conservative Party is two leaders away from the sort of change it needs to make in order to become properly electable again. And the argument is whether it has the time to go through two leaders before it happens. To a certain extent, I hope I'm wrong with that, because a Conservative Party with a strong One Nation ethos, I believe, is unstoppable, and that's part of the reason why the Conservative Party have been in power for so long. But also that a Conservative Party without a strong One Nation ethos it has absolutely no compassion, and therefore not only is it unelectable, it shouldn't be elected. It doesn't deserve to be elected. And the Conservative Party, certainly in my view, lacks compassion, and at the moment is all it's doing is following the path that Reform have followed, and not doing it as well. Sometime or another, it's got to change, and I hope things like this podcast and a few other things, think tanks, although there's not yet a dedicated One Nation think tank, I hope will maintain the thinking and the thought leadership, so that when it does come back to, the Conservative Party does start to come back to the centre, it's not starting afresh, basically. So One Nationism today, I've mentioned that One Nationism today has died within the Conservative Party, but it's also worth mentioning that that there are still some thinking about what it means today, and that's part of what I want to explore today. There's a couple of dimensions there. What does it mean for us as a country, but also to set it in the context of an international dimension, because One Nationism is not something that can just be applied to the UK alone in the way that it was in 1845. So for me, the principles of One Nationism apply everywhere, and they apply in terms of meritocracy. And that's why I believe public transport is really, really important, and affordable public transport is really important. If you want to create a meritocracy, you've got to have every single job available to as many people as it possibly can. And if that's to happen, then you have to make sure that as many people as possible are able to access a place of work. Yes, there's working from home and all that, but you still have to go into work sometimes. And unaffordable public transport is a significant barrier, and that's not just bad for individuals, it's actually bad for society. Just think about, as an employer, if you want to employ somebody into a post, you want the widest possible pool of people to choose from, and if people can't access public transport, then they can't an affordable public transport, then those sorts of some opportunities will inevitably be denied them. But I believe the fundamentals of One Nationism start within our education system. And if it was up to me, I would be calling for a Royal Commission on Education tomorrow to revisit where we are. How do we move away from what has become, certainly in our 5 to 18 system, basically an exam factory? into something that, yes, enables people to get qualified, enables people to pass exams, but also creates a system where by the time they leave secondary education, after doing their A levels, arguably, some do leave at 16 and move on to apprenticeships and the like. But by the time they leave, they should have a ladder in front of them. It's a ladder to success. And that ladder, they should have, first of all, the basics of knowledge, of the sort of knowledge they need to be able to start to climb that ladder, but also the self-belief that they can climb it. And I think that's especially important when we start looking at the areas of deprivation and the people and the children that live in those areas. We need to be talking about and getting self-belief in those young people as much as we can. And our education system should be doing that. And I think it's absolutely fundamental to what a one nationist thinker should be doing. And I raise another thought here. There was a conversation, I think it was during David Cameron's time as Prime Minister, about the fact that universities should recognise that somebody comes from a very, very difficult inner city area who gets 2 A's or 2 A's and a B, or an A and 2 B's, or even 3 B's at A level, has achieved as much as somebody that went to a public school and achieved 3 A's. And there's a reality about that, and if you know education, you'll know that there's truth in that, and therefore we need to start thinking about how we treat those high achieving individuals from those areas, in terms of giving them opportunity. The other thing I want to do is talk about the international dimension with One Nationism. If you think about the world now compared to 1845, one of the things that's different is that we've got a bigger view of the world. It obviously comes with the internet. It's obviously more than that. News, newspapers, and the accessibility of news and newspapers is a big part of it as well. But it means that not only do we understand the rest of the world, but the rest of the world, remember, have got access to the internet. They've got access to mobile phones. And so they're able to see what the rest of the world is like. And it is no surprise, certainly it shouldn't be a surprise, that somebody that comes from a country, an impoverished country, is not, some of those people are not going to look at a phone and say, that looks great, let's go there, and try and get the best for their family. And we need to understand that that's the case. And therefore, if we want to take control of immigration in the way that many people want, we shouldn't have a hypocritical system where we also slash overseas aid, so we can't do the things that are needed to make their lives better and to create an aspirational lifestyle for them where they live. And it baffles me, this link that there seems to be between the people that are the most strong and vociferous about sorting out our immigration system and the need to cut overseas aid. The two are inextricably linked. Now, there's arguments about whether we use it wisely and all those things. Yeah, that's great. Let's create a system where we do use it wisely. But there's other reasons as well why we need to start doing this. And if we can create business investment in a way that works, we can create investment that works for us as well as for others. And so works for us in this country as well as overseas. It's sort of what China's been trying to do, to be honest, and we've never tried to replicate it. But I think they're not having as much success with it now as they did 10, 15 years ago is what I understand. I need to look a bit deeper at that. But I want to put that international dimension into a slightly more worrying context, really. I believe that if the solution to the Ukraine war ends up as it seems to be being pushed, which is that Ukraine has to cede territory, whether it's territory that Russia has gained through its invasion or not, Russia is going to be able to call that a victory. And if you look at Putin's ambitions, clearly stated ambitions, they don't just stay with Ukraine. And if you give Putin a sense that every time he does this, he's going to achieve a victory, he's going to do it again. And my view is, and this is also, by the way, a repeat of the 1930s, I'm afraid, and the 1940s. So we may be heading towards war, and that's one of the reasons why, we're having the conversations about the politicians are having conversations about the need to increase defence spending as a result of GDP. But the other thing we need to do is to make friends overseas. Some of the overseas nations and friends were fantastic contributors to the Second World War and the First World War, and we shouldn't forget it. And we need to have friends, because if they're not our friends, they've got the potential of becoming Putin's friends, and we need to start to recognise that. And overseas aid is a part of that. But it's the same thing about using overseas aid to create aspiration and to create a world around people that might otherwise drift to the UK, drift to Germany, drift to Europe, a reason to stay where they are and get the best for their family. I hope that makes sense to you. But that's me basically covered what I want to cover today. My next podcast is going to be probably about the budget. It won't happen until 2 or 3 days afterwards, just because my experience of budgets is that the devil is in the detail. So, yes, we are going to have somebody stand up and say lots of things in the House of Commons. Underneath that, there's lots of documentation with lots of unsaid things in it. And I think it's after we've had a chance to analyse that we need to come back and look at what's said and what it means, and what it means for our political system. If you've enjoyed listening to this, if you enjoyed watching it, please do all the things that I asked you to last time. Please like, please subscribe, please share it, let other people know that it's happened, and thanks to all those that have done it. It's really, really important. Also, don't be afraid to comment. I had a few lovely comments from the last podcast. Good or bad, please comment. It's always good for me to have them. And once again, thank you very much.